Η κυρία Αντορία Sarri, η οποία δουλεύει στο Πανεπιστήμιο, θα κάνει την εισαγωγή σήμερα και η ομιλία θα γίνει από τον κύριο Στίβεν Williams. Και το αντικείμενο της σημερινής ομιλίας θα είναι οι κοινότητες, η ιστορία των κοινοτήτων στη βορειοδυτική Αγγλία, κυρίως στο Liverpool και στο Μάντσεστερ.
Ευχαριστώ, Πάτερ.
Παρακαλώ,
ευχαριστούμε πάρα πολύ την Επιτροπή που μας διέθεσε το χώρο για να οργανώσουμε σήμερα αυτή την εκδήλωση. Οργανώνεται από το Hellenic Community, ένας καινούριος σύλλογος εδώ, στο Μάντσεστερ, που στα πλαίσια της κοινότητας, που σκοπό έχει να οργανώσει την ομογένεια εδώ πέρα, στην βορειοδυτική Αγγλία. Και παρενθετικά να πω ότι στις 9 Δεκεμβρίου επίσης οργανώνεται ρεμπέτικη βραδιά, αν ενδιαφέρεται κανείς, μετά το τέλος της ομιλίας να επικοινωνήσει. Η σημερινή ομιλία... με ακούτε, δεν ακούγομαι.
Δεν έχει μικρόφωνο, είναι λίγο.
Εντάξει, θα μιλάω και λίγο πιο αργά. Λοιπόν, η σημερινή ομιλία θα γίνει από τον Steve Williams. Είναι από το Liverpool. Έχει ξεκινήσει εδώ και αρκετά χρόνια και μελετά το παρελθόν των Ελλήνων εδώ στη βορειοδυτική Αγγλία, κυρίως Liverpool και Μάντσεστερ. Ο ίδιος είναι επαγγελματίας ερευνητής, δεν είναι επαγγελματίας ιστορικός, αλλά ασχολείται με το advertising και brand strategy. Am I correct, Steve? Yes. And he has his own company since 1999, Stratosphere Research company in Liverpool. So he works here in Liverpool and Manchester, and we thank him very much for the honor to research our past, our communities, and to be here with us today. It's a great honor for us. Και η σημερινή μέρα, να ξαναγυρίσω λίγο στα ελληνικά για όσους δεν γνωρίζουν, γιατί η ομιλία θα γίνει στα αγγλικά, είναι πάρα πολύ σπουδαία για τους Έλληνες, για τους Χιώτες ιδιαίτερα. Είναι πολύ μεγάλη μέρα σήμερα, 11 Νοεμβρίου. Γιορτάζουμε την απελευθέρωση της Χίου από τους Τούρκους και την ένωσή της με την Ελλάδα, που έγινε στις 11 Νοεμβρίου του 1912. Τέτοια μέρα όμως θυμόμαστε και τη μεγάλη σφαγή της Χίου που έγινε στα 1822. Είναι η μεγαλύτερη καταστροφή που έχει γίνει ποτέ στο νησί. Ο Στίβ θα μας πει γι' αυτό πώς μέσα από αυτή την καταστροφή τελικά γεννήθηκε κάτι καλό εδώ στο Μάντσεστερ. Θα μας τα πει ο Στίβ πολύ καλύτερα και πιο αναλυτικά. Η σφαγή αυτή ήταν πάρα πολύ καταστροφική για το νησί, γιατί υπήρχε πολύ μεγάλη ευημερία στο νησί μέχρι τότε. Ήταν σχετικά ελεύθερο, δεν έμοιαζε με τις άλλες περιοχές του ελληνικού χώρου που είχαν κατακτηθεί από τους Τούρκους. Σκεφτείτε ότι γύρω στα 1800 είχαμε 120.000 ψυχές στο νησί πληθυσμό, εκ των οποίων οι Τούρκοι ήταν μόνο 3.000. 117.000 χριστιανοί και γύρω στους 100 Εβραίους. Οπότε ήταν πάρα πολύ μικρός ο πληθυσμός των Τούρκων και το νησί ευημερούσε, πλήρωνε μειωμένη φορολογία, αφενός λόγω της μαστίχας, αφετέρου γιατί είχε και σημαντικούς παράγοντες μέσα στην τουρκική αυλή κοντά στο Σουλτάνο και είχε επιτύχει να έχει προνόμια οικονομικά και θρησκευτικές ελευθερίες και κατάφερε να αναπτυχθεί πάρα πολύ. Οι περιηγητές την περιγράφουν ως η Γένοβα της Ανατολής, λένε κάποιοι, άλλοι ως Υπήγειο Παράδεισο την περιγράφουν, και όταν γίνεται η επανάσταση της Ελλάδας, στην αρχή οι Χιώτες δεν ήθελαν να λάβουν μέρος, γιατί υπήρχε ηρεμία στο νησί, περνούσαν καλά θα μπορούσαμε να πούμε. Τελικά όμως από κάποιους οργανώθηκε η επανάσταση, δυστυχώς όχι πάρα πολύ οργανωμένα και έτσι κατεπνίγει πάρα πολύ φρικτά. Για να πω τα νούμερα απλώς, ότι από τους 117.000 ανθρώπους που ήταν εκεί, πιστεύετε ότι τα νούμερα είναι ότι 42.000 περίπου σφαγιάστησαν, 50.000 πουλήθηκαν ως σκλάβοι, δηλαδή τα 3/4 του νησιού. 23.000 από αυτούς κατάφεραν να ξεφύγουν είτε στη Σύρο, είτε στην υπόλοιπη Ελλάδα, είτε στο εξωτερικό, και κάποιοι ήρθαν και εδώ στο Μάντσεστερ, και γύρω στους 1.500, το πολύ 2.000 ανθρώπους σε ολόκληρο το νησί κατάφεραν να παραμείνουν ζωντανοί. Από αυτούς που έφυγαν στο εξωτερικό, κάποιοι ήρθαν εδώ στο Μάντσεστερ, στο Λίβερπουλ, υπήρχαν ήδη κάποιοι Χιώτες εδώ σε αυτή την περιοχή και ήρθαν ακόμη περισσότερο, προκόψανε, δημιούργησαν, γίνανε πάρα πολύ καλοί έμποροι Και ο Στίβεν θα μας πει σήμερα για αυτούς τους ανθρώπους που στήσανε τις πρώτες εδώ κοινότητες, χτίσανε την εκκλησία μας και εδώ και στο Liverpool. Thank you very much, Steve. So I'm passing it on to you today. Thank you.
Well, thanks everybody for coming along this afternoon. Thanks for inviting me to this. You could probably tell if anyone could see my face, I had no idea what Antonia was saying then. I don't speak a word of Greek, apart from Efharisto, so thank you all, Efharisto, for inviting me this afternoon. It's very strange for me. A year ago, I had no idea I was going to suddenly become a historian, because I'm not. As I think Antonia made it clear, I work in advertising and things like that. I did a degree a long time ago, but I never thought I'd go back to it. It's been a real pleasure to return. And this is an unusual topic, why I've returned to history. I got interested in the history of the Greeks in the northwest of England. It's very specific. So someone said to me a while back, "You're a local historian." I said, "I'm not. My topic is the Greeks in the northwest," and that's what it is. I suppose I should say why I got interested in the first place. Well, I was 60 the other week, but when I was 17 3/4, I got a ride in my Greek friend's car. He was a rich boy, he had a car, okay? He put a tape on, and this wild music started playing. I said, "What's that?" He said, "It's bouzouki music." I'd never heard it before. So for my 18th birthday, I asked my mum for a bouzouki. All the other boys got cars, I wanted a bouzouki. So I've still got a bouzouki, I do play a bouzouki. So I've always had that kind of weird interest in it's broken now actually. If anyone's got any spare bouzouki's, I'll take them. So I've always had this interest sort of in the back of my mind anyway. But where I live in Liverpool, near Penny Lane, around there's a big park called Sefton Park, which is a bit like Heaton Park, very similar, except there's houses all the way around it. Great big houses. And I often walk around there and I think, who the heck could afford to live in those when they're built in the 19th century? Nowadays, they're all about 20 apartments, you know, lots of people in there, people more like me, poor people with names like Williams and those sort of things. But I then went to an exhibition. I'll show you some pictures from it a little bit later. And it showed the insides of some of these houses. And I started looking at the names of the owners. And there were strange names. I said, and the commentary said they were Greek names. Even I thought they were Greek, but not quite Greek. I'll come back to that soon, actually. So I wondered, why were these semi-Greek names living in big houses down the road to my house? That was quite strange. Then I saw something else, a reference to the famous Greek-speaking poet Cavafy. Who's heard of Cavafy? Yeah. Okay, he's very famous. I found that he lived in Liverpool and Manchester. I know less about that. In the 1860s, 1870s for about 5 years. So I thought, why is Constantine Cavafy, this famous poet from Alexandria, living in Liverpool and indeed Manchester at the time? So I just started finding what I could, and I thought it was a strange story. Very difficult to understand at first, actually, who they were. I mean, the first word up here, if I get out the camera, Chiots, I didn't know what that meant, you know, so I had to find these things out and piece the story together along the way. So that's really what we got is my story, and then I got bullied about a year ago to do my first lecture on this, and it seems to have grown from there. So that's what it's about. So I make no confessions about the fact that this was really about Liverpool to start with. But more or less everything I look at also applies to Manchester, and I'll hopefully prove that later on with 1 or 2 slides I've got. So I've done it about Liverpool mainly, but it's also true of Manchester. They're the same people moving around between the two. So let's have a little look. So, now this one, I think, basically, Antonia, I think, has already mentioned this. This is a very, very famous painting. This is when, dare I say, Chios was first placed on the map. This is a painting of the massacre of 1822, painted by the famous French painter Eugène Delacroix, depicting that he painted in 24. It's enormous, actually. I think it's in the Louvre. It's probably not as high as that wall. It's a massive painting. And it went on tour in the 1820s around Europe, various cities. It was taken around. So the massacre of Chios became very, very famous in Europe at that time, around the world, really. And it made his career as well. He became very famous after that. It was his first big hit. Now, I think that Antonia's probably given you some of the stats already, but I think I will repeat this, because this is my attempt to understand what Chios was. You all know that there was the struggle for Greek nationality in the early 19th century. The Greeks were wanting their own country, quite right too. And the Chiots were very keen on Greek unity as well, clearly. They thought of themselves as Greeks. But their island, I'll see if I've got my map next actually. There's a little map. You can see, if I can find where it is, Chios is right by Turkey, so right by the Ottoman Empire here. You can see from that that's Chios, the strange kidney shape It's like a kidney, right by there. So they supported the movement for independence. They wanted the Greek nationality. They gave plenty of money to the cause in the background, but they didn't really want to get involved with the fighting. It was too dangerous. They thought they'd be slaughtered, basically. They knew what was coming in a weird kind of way. People from the island up, I think, Samos. Is anyone here from Samos before I say anything rude? Or no, I'm not going to actually. I wouldn't dream it. But they were already in the fight, really. And they wanted their comrades in Chios to join in the fighting. So some people from Samos went to Chios and said, right, time to join in the fight. Chios said, well, we don't really want to, but, you know. So, and then I think basically what happened, they attacked a few local Turkish dignitaries, took them into custody, maybe murdered one or two, something like that, which is the last thing what the Chiots did. And I'll explain why it was the last thing they wanted in a bit more detail in a minute. But basically, at that point, the Turkish said, right, we're not having this. We've kept you. They basically let Chios run itself for the previous 250 years. If I got my numbers right, something like that. We're now going to take over. So they invaded the island, and exactly as Antonia, I'm sure, has described it better than I did. It was appalling slaughter. So the population was about 120,000 at the beginning. 3/4 of those people were either enslaved, killed, or other terrible things. Apparently there's one number we've both seen, which is at the end of this process, only about 2,000 people left on the island. Actually, later on the population recovered a bit, but I believe there was a terrible earthquake later in the 19th century, which killed a lot more people. So it was really, really bad time. So I'm thinking, what is this strange place? So you can see where it is up here. So Chios is. Chios was a strange place because it's sort of Greek. It's right by Turkey, but actually the ruling elite were half Italian. In fact, not just any old Italian, they're from Genoa. The island had been invaded in I forgot my number, I better check that very quickly. 1304, something like that. And it wasn't even by Genoa, it was basically by a company, a joint stock company from Genoa, invaded, took over the island, and then ran it for the next 250 years. And they intermarried with the local population, and it became a sort of elite. And that's why we'll see some names soon. So they also intermarried with the Phanariots from the old ruling class from the Byzantine Empire, who were still living in Constantinople. They intermarried, and they became this sort of hybrid elite of Greeks and Italians living on this tiny island. And from that tiny island, they controlled an enormous amount of trade in the Mediterranean. That was really why they didn't want any disruption. They didn't want to get involved in any fighting. They were doing too well. There's great natural resources on the island, like mastic, gum and things like that. There's other things, silk production. But actually, the main thing they did was trade across the area. They traded on ships all around the Mediterranean. So let's look at this. So, what happened after the invasion? At the time, quite a lot of the Chiots had been abroad anyway, because they traded around all these different ports. Sorry, I've gone back one too far there. They were based all around the place. So they had people based in Marseille, that was a really big base. Trieste up there, which is sort of Austria. Livorno, or Leghorn as we British call it, because we can't say Livorno, and various places in Italy. And around Alexandria, of course, Constantinople. So they had bases all around here. And they were also beginning to look at the city of London at that time. So quite a few of the elites were already abroad anyway. So they weren't slaughtered. And this, especially what happened is they rebuilt themselves around the world. They tried to establish a new base in Syros. I'm not too sure where that is actually. It's somewhere out here. That kind of became a second island that they ran. The same people. But really, they operated on this internationalised basis where they had the companies all around Europe at that time. So to give an example of that, it wasn't just around Europe. I said Europe, but actually they also had bases in Bombay for the cotton production in Bombay, and also in the States. So lots of Chiots went to New Orleans, as we see here, and also New York. So what you've got here is a painting by another famous French painter. I don't know why I have so many French painters here today. This is Degas. Degas went to New Orleans and he painted people working in the cotton exchange, and these guys over here testing the cotton, that's what they're doing, are actually Chiots. I think that's Mr. Agelasto or something like that there, actually. Ancestors of some of the modern Chiots. So they got everywhere and they kept in touch and they formed this kind of economic model of their own. Let me just go back a bit. This is what I was talking before about strange names, hybrid names. These are actually a list of people who were based in Liverpool in the sort of 1870s or something like that, who made up a delegation who went to see a Liberal minister at the time in the Reform Club in Liverpool. So the great and the good of the Greek community in Liverpool at the time. You look at those names, some of them definitely look Greek, and an Ostopoulou over the end there. But the others look like hybrids. So that one to me, I just thought, if I'd seen that, I'd have thought, that's definitely Italian looking, that's Italian looking again. And this is, here's a good example. Here's one of the names, Calvo Caresi, a very sort of famous Chiots family, and I'm told there's people with that name still there nowadays. But that, Calvo is a Genoese name, Caresi is a Greek name. They intermarried from, I don't know, 1400 onwards or something, and that's why you get this strange Genoese-Greek hybrid. That's what it's about. Okay, right, this is the only really tough chart today, I think, as far as this is the economic history, trying to give a sense of how important they were. So after the massacres, the Chiots tried to rebuild themselves around Europe and around the world, and they formed these new companies, and these companies were basically traded with each other, they were related to each other, they shared capital, and they shared family members. Basically, they were all cousins. Sometimes when the Chiots would meet in exile, they tried to see what the relationship was with each other, and there might be cousins 12 different times, second cousins 24 different times, so they were very related. But basically, there were 60 families. This lady here, Jelena Harlaftis, she's the main historian of the Greek ship industry. I've got a lot of this data from there. She calls it the Chiot model, which dominated the trade in the Mediterranean in the 1830s to about the 1860s. She said it was dominated by 60 families. Half of them were directly from Chios, the others were half from the other Greek areas. They're interconnected by marriage, and they also all work for the Chiot-dominated companies. Incredibly powerful. By the 1850s, 58 of these family enterprises, because they were families, but they're also basically companies at the same time, had offices in London, Manchester or Liverpool, and quite often in all three. Quite hard to tell who's who. They seem to have, you know, Raleigh Brothers Liverpool, Raleigh Brothers Inc. Liverpool, Manchester. They seem to start and then abandon a lot of different companies. How much business were they doing? Well, the sort of information is a bit patchy. You get bits of information and try and put it together. But in, so 1850, we see they control 31% of basically the tonnage of the freight entering British ports from the Eastern Mediterranean and the Black Sea. It's handled by Greek merchants, again, mostly Chiots. By 1860, that had gone up to 57%. So if you think of how much stuff that is coming through, it's quite amazing. They were dealing in things like grain, i.e. wheat and so on, which would be coming from, probably from the Black Sea, wool, cotton, linseed, tallow, manufactured goods, that's to say, garments. I also spotted another reference this week, they're also moving opium around at the time as well, which was probably legal, I'm not too sure. Excuse me, at that time the most important merchants were Raleigh. Raleigh is the biggest name of all. I don't know what year it was, but at some point, probably early 20th century, the Raleigh family, the main company, had 40,000 employees, which meant it was probably the world's biggest company. It's kind of basically finished in about 1960 when it sort of petered out. There's still companies around. Liverpool's still got Raleigh House. There's still a lot of people called Raleigh, but that was its peak. It was literally the biggest company in the world. So we've got Raleigh, Rodokanaki, Silizzi, which looks quite Italian to me, Casavetti, if I spelled it right, Ionidi, which means he's probably from the Ionian Islands, Spartali. And most of their commerce involved Liverpool, and when I say Liverpool, that means coming into Liverpool and then going to Manchester, probably, especially if it's cotton or wool to be made into clothing. Just going back to that, so essentially the Greeks arrived in London from the 1820s onwards and began to enter the city of London, establish their reputation as fair traders and that kind of thing, you know, people you could trust to do business with. So that was the main base. It always was the main base really, but then they came to Manchester and Liverpool to watch the goods coming in, so they'd see what they bought from the States was coming into the warehouses, and they kept an eye on it in Manchester to see that it was being made properly and that the deals were being done correctly. So that's why there were the sort of 3 points on the English or British compass. Just a little bit of data. By the Liverpool Cotton Association writes the rules for cotton trading around the world, even does to this day. 1906 to 07, there were 7 Greek firms that were full members, and 6 were associate firms, so it's 14 firms. One of those is in Manchester, 3 in London. I found this big book with all the names of people who ever joined the Liverpool Cotton Exchange, and I went through and looked for Greek names. You can see it's Pallas, Parmenides. I'm probably making a fool of myself pronouncing these names, but badly I'm doing this. Rodokanaki, Spartali, Vlasto, Negroponte, and there were 8 people from the Raleigh family, so they really were dominant. So that is a pretty powerful economic model. In the end, I think what happened, by the way, they tended not to own the ships. They tended to buy space on the ships to do the trading. There was one company in Liverpool called Papagianni, who were, I think the Papianos were from Smyrna rather than Chios, and they did build a shipping line in the 19th century. I'll come back to that fairly soon. So they built the money that way, but most of them did the trade and did their own ships. But they were very dominant. From kind of the 1860s onwards, the model changed. It's more people from the Ionian Islands, i.e. Corfu and Kefalonia, and those kind of places were more important. Let's try and, so if that's the economic side, let's try and find a bit about more where they lived and how they lived and things like that. And I was delighted to come today because I've only ever seen this as a picture before. So that's the church here, the Church of the Ascension here in High Broughton. And I knew that it was started in 1861, it was consecrated. But the interesting thing, there was actually some sort of church before that. In 1861, when the church was built, it was the first dedicated sort of purpose-built Greek church in the country. But there was, they also, I think, worked in Cheetham Hill or something like that beforehand. Similarly, in Liverpool, there was a community, if you know the big Anglican cathedral in Liverpool, the original Greek church was right by there, but I think it was just a conversion of an old building. So here it is. So they must show the money they had to build churches like this. That's the one in Liverpool, St. Nicholas, which is also like a mini version of Hagia Sophia, I think, in Constantinople. Yeah, so definitely on this one, Manchester was first, 1861. I think Liverpool was either second or third in 1870. I don't know exactly what happened in Manchester, but certainly in Liverpool, the Greeks at the time, the Chiots and the others, tended to live near to the churches. So in Liverpool, it meant they lived in Sefton Park, Fulwood Park, Ullet Road, that kind of area there. I imagine they lived initially in this part of Manchester as well, when it was probably quite a lot richer, moving out towards Whitefield and up towards Heaton Park. In London, they tended to live in very specifically around Bayswater, where the church of the cathedral is. Bayswater, Notting Hill, Westbourne Grove. I've walked around looking at some of those houses. They actually look like the houses around Sefton Park. There must have been a style they went for. The Greeks were these Greeks were certainly aspirational. There's no doubt about that at all. They had a lot of money. They liked to flaunt it. Outside the houses in Liverpool, certainly in Sefton Park, they had the Rolls Royces, the Bentleys parked outside. They sent their kids to the best schools they could find. So lots of them went to Eton, Winchester, Harrow, those kind of things. Very, very aspirational for the kids. And they did well. And they liked to live in the grand style. Let me show you some pictures of houses. So this is a house in Liverpool called Osborne House. I don't think that picture does it justice. It's absolutely enormous, this thing. Absolutely massive. So that's where it's like that now. And that was lived in by, I think, the Vlasto family, or maybe some of the Palace family from about 1890, something like that. What I find really weird is going to look at it now, because that's a recent photo. You notice the colours? It looks like the Greek flag. So there've been no Greeks living there for a long time, but I imagine when they paint it, they use the same colours. They just keep doing it in blue and white. It was actually called Osborne House. That's what it was called. Anyone? Does that ring any bells with anyone? Well, Osborne House is the name of Queen Victoria's house, or place she lived in when she stayed on the Isle of Wight. I think it's quite deliberate. Some of the books say it was called Woodlands, but I think it was actually Osborne House. I seem to have lost one of my houses here, which is puzzling me. Maybe it comes later. No, I'll look at it later. So what were they like inside? Well, this one was enormous. I've actually read that quite a lot of the rooms are just empty. You get these enormous houses, what you actually put in them, you know, so probably were empty on top. Inside, in some of them, these are the pictures I saw a few years back that got me interested. These are the kind of rooms in the houses owned by the Greeks. Excuse me, I'm slightly dry here. So you can see they're very Victorian looking inside. Very, very Victorian, lots of things going on. I think they've also got a sort of Greek or even an Oriental flavour. There's a lot going on in there. Seeing this one too. These beautiful swags of material over the fireplace. Maybe the photographer's done that. They were done by this photographer called Bedford Lemire. He went around lots of the country doing things, but you've got a fabulous set here. So these beautiful things. Where I've got to go with these actually is a description from someone who lived in one of these houses. So I think it is actually, I've just got one more to do. Okay. Inside, so this is the grand style and really. Never compete with the police. Okay, so someone who grew up in one of these houses said that inside, actually in the house she lived in was called Tatoi. Let me show you that first. That's the, actually no, I will come back to that one. She lived in a house called Tatoi. So why do you think it was called Tatoi or Tatoi? The Greek palace, basically. So you had one family in Liverpool called the house after Queen Victoria's house. The other family went one higher and called it after the king of the Hellenes, Helen's house. Tatoi. So inside Tatoi, this description, it said, it epitomised the worst taste of the late Victorian era. In the hall there was a collection of Far Eastern weapons suggestive of a medieval torturer's apparatus. On the floor there was a tiger that was spread-eagled, and when you first went in, your first impression was a peculiar and all-pervading smell, lincrusta. I don't know what lincrusta is, but some of the people are supposed to do remember it's a dreadful smell in people's houses, which is applied above the dado rails, as they call them, to stop wear and tear. It was better than the flock wallpaper that was above it. Complementing the lincrusta and the flock in the living room and on the floor and landings with thick piled red, blue and green turkey carpet. It's all very, very tasteful maybe. The drawing room, like the owner, the lady who owned the place, like his mistress, was a period piece. A labyrinth of pierced sandalwood screens, ivory inlaid ebony tables, glazed cabinets and whatnots, as they were called, displayed themselves on two large mauve and blue silk carpets. So totally over the top to modern taste. An elephant's tusk containing a presentational scroll from the staff of Raleigh Brothers in Bombay. An oriental gong, doing, chessmen in the shape of sort of elephants with riders on the back, and armed Gurkhas, you know, the soldiers. All competed for pride of place against a background of olive green curtains. So pretty over-the-top decoration inside. So they made a lot of money. They lived in massive houses. They probably did here as well, even though I haven't got the pictures. They sent the kids to these schools. Let's look at some of the people themselves. There are quite a lot of very interesting people I could have picked up. I picked up 5 or maybe 6 to look at today. And this is a very, very interesting guy. Out of interest, anyone ever heard of Alexander Palace? No, not to be confused with Alexander Palace in London, the Victoria place. This man was born in about 1850. That, by the way, that says Tatoi. You can just read it. That's the post outside the house. It took me years to finally spot that. T-A-T-O. Very, very difficult to see. So that was his house. He was born in about 1850 in Bombay. He came to Manchester when he was 18. He lived here for about 6 or 7 years. Then he went to live in Liverpool. He married into the Raleigh family, I think, and became the managing director of the Raleigh Brothers enterprise in Liverpool. So he basically was a top businessman running things. So he was, like a lot of these people we look at, they've got joint Liverpool-Manchester stories. Amazing guy. So besides being incredibly successful in business, he was a scholar as well. He did incredible things on the quiet. 2 things he was very passionate about. Well, actually, what he was very passionate was the Demotic Greek. He thought that the church, instead of using, I know this is very controversial, I've seen things about it even this week, instead of using just relying on New Testament Greek, he thought things should be translated into the Greek that the people actually spoke, Demotic Greek. So he translated 2 books that I'm aware of. Firstly, he translated Homer. He translated the Odyssey into modern Greek. Whether he was the first to do that, actually, maybe it was the Iliad, he did one of the... so he's sitting in his house in Liverpool by Sefton Park, running Raleigh Brothers for the Northwest and translating Homer. So he translated that into modern Greek. And then he translated, and this was the really scary, he translated the New Testament into modern Demotic Greek. And he did it safely from over here. Some people read it out in the churches in Athens. They began to use it for services, and there were riots. There were literally riots. And this was in, I think it was in 1901, when this led to serious riots. 8 people actually died. So he was not able to get the book published in Athens till 1924. So if you're lucky enough to get a first edition or any of the early editions, they're all published in Liverpool because it was so controversial. So it led to, as I say, it led to these riots. It was banned till 1924. So he's an amazing guy. He had 5 kids. I could talk to you about all of them. They're all amazing in different ways. They all did astonishing things. I think one of them went back to Athens and became a minister actually in the government. But let me tell you about this one. This is a bloke called Marco Pallas, one of the 5 kids. He's famous for three things really, three really interesting things. It's worth saying in 1917 he was at the Battle of Cambrai on the Western Front. I'm sure Cambrai rings a bell because I think it was the first battle where tanks were actually used or something like that, one of the very first battles. So it's appropriate we're talking about today on Armistice Day. He was wounded there and basically got a wound through his knee. I think he was shot through the knee. Now I don't know about you, but if I was shot through the knee, I think I'd get myself a walking stick and not really do much for the rest of my life. He decided to become a mountain climber. So hence I've got pictures of the mountain. He went to the Himalayas. I think he went initially with people from Liverpool University, got himself a sort of team together, but he kept going back. And he became one of the best mountaineering experts in the world, one of the people who really developed that. It's quite big now, but it's quite unusual in those days. And he wrote books about mountaineering. He then took an interest in Buddhism. So he became a Buddhist, he learned Tibetan, and he translated works from Tibetan into Greek and probably into English as well. Incredible bloke. So there's one of his books of the Peaks and Lamas and the Buddhist spectrum. So the other thing he did was there was a big revival in the 20th century in interest in early music, as it's called. That's to say, Western music from, say, the 15th, 14th, 16th, 17th centuries. He got very interested in that. And that also included reviving the instruments that were used at the time. So instead of using modern instruments, they just recreated oldie type ones. The pioneer in that was a man called Arnold Dolmetsch, who was actually a Belgian. Basically what happened is Pallas was very keen on this, and he gave Dolmetsch money to revive the instruments. How many of you played the recorder at school? Anyone played the recorder at school? The little thing, no? God, you're lucky. No? You're really, yeah, good. Thank you for being honest. Everyone's keeping it. It's such a shameful thing, actually. I don't think people own up to it. But basically, all the schools in England. You played it, mate?
No, I didn't.
Okay, maybe I'm older than I think. I certainly had to play it. I was rubbish at it too. So all the kids in England were given recorders from, I say, the 1930s onwards. These funny little things like little flutes, and it's all his fault. He put the money into the Dolmetsch family to revive the flute, which had been dead. Some people would say rightly dead from about 1600. So that was all his fault. So amazing guy. His, the house he lived in, by the way, where the Pallas family lived, Tatoi, if you look at it now, about 5 doors away, there's a big Buddhist temple, but there's no connection apparently, just sheer fluke it's ended up in the same place. Okay. Talking about wars, this is an amazing guy. Out of sheer interest, has anyone heard of George Rodokanecki? No, he should be famous. He really should. He is, some people back in the Greek community in Liverpool started to call him the Scouse Schindler. This guy did an awful lot to save people's lives, including Jewish lives, in the Second World War. He's commemorated in Marseille. There's an avenue named after him, the Avenue of George Rodokanecki. Let me tell you his story. I think he was born in Liverpool. He certainly lived in the same area as all the other people I've talked about till he was senior school age, when he went to Marseille. Marseille seems to have been the big base for the Chiots in particular. They made marriages out there, and that sort of thing. If they had one base, it was probably Marseille. That's his wife, Fanny. So he became a doctor. He was based in France then. Whether he came back on trips, I don't know. In the First World War, he tried to join the British Army as a medic. They wouldn't have him because he was a French doctor. Okay, he'd actually done his studying over there. He tried to join the French army, and they wouldn't have him because he was a British subject. So I think at that point he gave up and became French. The Chiots in particular clearly didn't care about nationalities that much. They would swap them as they needed to. They changed the name, so he's probably George or Hyogi back home, or they were genuinely cosmopolitan, and that's a great Greek word, the best probably. He was a genuinely cosmopolitan person, they all were. So in the First World War, when he finally managed to join up, he was gassed, he was wounded twice, he earned the Légion d'honneur and the Croix de Guerre. I think he had one actually given to him by Marshal Pétain or something like that. When the Second World War broke out, he ripped out these badges because he was so ashamed of Pétain and the way the French had behaved. He continued being a doctor. He had his doctor's practice in Marseille, but along the way he helped, helped the resistance in 4 different ways. Firstly, you know at Dunkirk, a lot of the British and the Allied troops managed to escape on the small ships. Not everybody did. Some had to try and make their way down through France. And they were hid by the French people, British people, and that sort of thing. The Rodokaneckis, George and Fanny, put lots of these people up in their flat above the surgery until such as times they could be smuggled out of the country, quite often over the border into Spain, actually, over the mountains, over the Pyrenees. He did that. He then helped other people who'd escaped, other kinds of refugees, including Jewish refugees. He put them up in his house. Along the way, during the war, the British and the Allied pilots often flew across France, tried to raid. The planes would come down, often shot down by the Germans and that sort of thing. So there was a resistance, amongst the resistance, they tried to help these people and get them out of the country. A lot of them drifted down towards Marseille in the hope of getting ships, and a lot of them were put up in the Rodokanecki's flat. So dozens and dozens, I think I actually saw a figure, something like 200 people were saved that way. So he did incredible things. One other thing he did, he became the sort of medical inspection officer for the American embassy. And as part of that, lots of Jewish refugees. That part of France, by the way, at that time, was not occupied by the Germans. It was the Vichy regime who collaborated with the Germans. But it was, You know, the Jews were, at that point hadn't been rounded up. They were trying to escape France and other countries. They ended up in Marseille. So a lot of them tried to get to the States. One of the things they had to do was prove that they were medically fit. George Rodekanaki had seen them and said, yes, you're definitely medically fit. And he helped thousands of Jews escape from the Nazis. Sadly, in the end, he couldn't escape himself. The line that he was involved with, the resistance line, the PAT line, the escape line, was betrayed. This is typically what happened. The Gestapo had smelled something was going on. They became very suspicious of the Greek community in Marseille. They thought they were a bad lot. They thought they were working with the Allies. And actually they were on the quiet. And they investigated him. He was arrested in February 1943. He went to Buchenwald and died there in 1944. I think he actually got sick by the way he was treated. He was quite a sick man anyway. And in his dying minutes, he called all the French prisoners he could together around his bed. They all sang La Marseillaise, and then he died. An incredible guy. So there should be plaques to him everywhere. Certainly there should be one in Liverpool. I'm sure there will be at some point. There's a lot of interest in him now. So he was an amazing guy. Let's see who else we got. Of all the names I have to pronounce today, this is the worst. I've no idea to say this. This is a man called George Eumorphopoulos. Okay, that's my best go. He was born in Liverpool, I can't quite remember, maybe 1870, 1860, something like that, in Bedford Street by the university. He eventually went down to London and became the boss of the Raleigh Brothers enterprise, full stop. He ran the whole thing. But like all these Chiots, yes, they like making money, they like business, but they're also deeply cultured. This guy's interest was in Oriental objects, basically. So if you ever go to the V&A in London, the Victoria and Albert Museum, and look at the Oriental selection, huge portions of it came from his collection, which he donated when he died in maybe the 20s or 30s. Amazing guy. I think I've mentioned this name already, the one on the left, which is Calvo-Carresi. This is Peter Calvo-Carresi. Two different people, Peter Calvo-Carresi and Alexis Vlasto on the other side. Haven't got a picture of him. These are war heroes in a different way. In the Second World War, they're both very clever people. Both went to Eton. I think Calvo-Carresi studied history at Oxford. Vlasto, I think, studied languages at Oxford. During the war, they both went to work with Bletchley Park. So they were involved in cracking the German enigma, basically, cracking the German codes. Incredible people. The curious thing is, if you look in Peter Calvo-Carresi's autobiography, which I did the other week, he said he didn't know anyone at Bletchley Park. He must have known that guy. He was his cousin, lived up the road from him, and they went to school together. So he's obviously, I think he was quite shy, Vlasto. I think he just liked to get on and do his thing. So after the war, actually during the war, one of the amazing things, having cracked the German codes, they said, we now need to understand what the Japanese are doing. Can you have a look at that, Alexis? So he said, okay then. Went away. About 6 weeks later said, yeah, okay, I've learned Japanese now, let me have a go. So he then worked on trying to crack the Japanese codes. After the war, he completely forgot it. He became the world expert on the early history of the Russian language. Astonishing guy. Calvo-Carresi, I think he may have been born in Bombay or something like that. He was certainly brought up in Liverpool. He lived there to 13 or 14, apart from when he was away at school. He did all kinds of things. Besides working at Bletchley, he was also a lawyer, trained as a lawyer. So he prosecuted the Nazi war criminals at Nuremberg. He was one of the team there. After that, he became an academic. He became very interested in international affairs, helped found Sussex University, and later on ended up as the managing director of Penguin Books. Quite an amazing guy. If you go to someone like Waterstones nowadays at a big bookshop, there are yards and yards, or should I say meters and meters, of books about the Second World War. When I was a kid, there weren't many. That was the main one. His book, Total War, which he wrote with a guy called Guy Winch. It's the main book about the Second World War for maybe 10, 20 years. And he was also one of the first people that explained how they cracked the Enigma code and that sort of thing. So he wrote a book called Top Secret Ultra. Amazing bloke. Now, I said along the way, I've written this from a sort of Liverpool point of view, right? But actually a lot of the people, they're moving backwards and forwards. It's interchangeable. I want to show you a little bit of evidence. So you remember the last three people we've seen were, we have Rodekanaki, Eumorphopoulos, and Calvo-Carresi. Then last week, I thought I'd look at the census returns from Manchester in the 19th century. So the first one, and you can't see this, it's probably too far, but in 1851, okay, in Ducey Place, which I think is in Cheetham Hill, quite close by, it's probably within half a mile, there were three people staying there. There were three blokes in their 20s, 30s, 29, 26, 38. They were all shipping merchants, they were all from Greece, and they're all staying at this house in number 3 Ducey Place. And the names were Rodekanaki, Eumorphopoulos, Calvocaresi. So all those three people I talked about, and I haven't changed that since I last did those slides. By sheer fluke, their ancestors or family were here in the 1850s. So they're moving backwards and forwards between the two. Now, we talked about this guy a little bit before, so Cavafy. Okay, so incredibly famous Greek poet. I'm told that within Greece itself he's not the most famous Greek poet. It's George Sepharidis is probably the most famous one, I think. I got very excited a few weeks back. I found a George Sepharidis living in Liverpool as well, in 1900. This guy was just a sailor, it's not the same one. But we definitely have Cavafy. What I love with the Cavafy family, I think they're originally from Constantinople, so they were Phanariots, but they moved backwards and forwards. They came to England in the 1840s. There's certainly some of them in London, some in Manchester, some in Liverpool. They set up companies there, and they traded across the Mediterranean. They went back to Alexandria. I say back, I'm not sure whether they'd been there for a while, but they went back to Alexandria in about 1860 or something like that. And then along the way, Cavafy's father died, I think. It sounded like the business went wrong as well. So for some reason, they came back to England. So Cavafy as a teenager, or maybe he's 11, 12, 16, came to England for 5 years. Okay, as far as we can see, most of the time he spent in Liverpool and some of the time in London, but he was also in Manchester as well. It's a bit vaguer what actually happened in Manchester. In Liverpool, I could point out the two houses he lived in. One's very close to the Greek church over there, St. Nicholas's, in a street called Huskisson Street. He's an astonishing poet. He, if you've read his work, he seems to write two types of poems. He writes poems about the young men that he adored in Alexandria. That's one category. The other ones he wrote were about ancient Greek life in Alexandria. They're his interests. One of his most famous poems is called The City. Does anyone know that one, The City? It's a fantastic poem. Well, everyone assumes it's part of Alexandria, and that's what it's about. I look at it now and think it's nothing to do with Alexandria. As far as I'm concerned, that's a poem about growing up as a teenager in Liverpool, or maybe Manchester. Listen to the words he said. By the way, there's so many translations of Cavafy. There's probably more translations of Cavafy than any other foreign poet. Maybe Baudelaire or someone like that would be more famous. But there are dozens. Every year more translations come out. This one's done by Keeley and Sherrard. I'll read a bit of it. Maybe I'll read it all. So this is The City. Is it about Alexandria, or is it wherever you grew up? I don't know. He said, "You said, I'll go to another country, go to another shore, find another city better than this one. Whatever I try to do is fated to turn out wrong, and my heart lies buried, as though it was something dead. How long can I let my mind moulder in this place? Wherever I turn, wherever I happen to look, I see the black ruins of my life here, where I've spent so many years, wasted them, destroyed them totally. You won't find a new country, won't find another shore. This city will always pursue you. You'll walk the same streets, grow old in the same neighbourhoods, will turn grey in these same houses. You will always end up in this city. Don't hope for things elsewhere. There is no ship for you. There is no road. As you've wasted your life here, in this small corner, you've destroyed it everywhere else in the world." Pretty miserable, actually, isn't it? I don't know why I always enjoy it. I'm sure it sounds better in Greek. Now, getting towards the end, really, just a few funny charts to end up on. Does anyone recognise this guy on the left? John Tavener. So he's a British composer who converted to the Orthodox faith, and a lot of his music expresses his belief in orthodoxy and a lot of his Greek settings. He was a big pal of the Beatles because he was on the Apple label back in the 60s. So he was a big pal of Paul McCartney. He set some poems of Cavafy in, I think, in the 1990s, set them to music, and they were to be performed in New York. Because he was pals with McCartney, he asked him to do the reading, because the readings as well as singing. McCartney refused. He said, "It sounds stupid read in a Liverpudlian accent." But as we've seen, we now know Cavafy may well have spoken with a sort of Liverpudlian accent when he did English. Earlier this year, I decided it was time to start reading old favourite books. Right, so I thought, what are my two most favourite old books? The answer was The Odyssey, obviously by Homer, and Ulysses by James Joyce. If you don't know it, Ulysses by James Joyce is based sort of on the Odyssey, and is really the most famous, the greatest English language, it's just about the English language, novel of the last 150 years. So I was thrilled to read both. I read The Odyssey first, then I read Ulysses. What I didn't know was that Homer was apparently, according to mythology, from Chios. You can't really prove this, but that's apparently where he's from. If you know anything about Joyce, he was, in my opinion, the greatest English language writer of the last 150 years. He grew up in Ireland. He fled away from Ireland because he felt oppressed by the church, by his family and everything. So he shot across Europe and ended up in Trieste, which at that time, before the First War, was the big port of Austria. So it's not quite so important now. The Austrian Navy was based there. To earn a living, he managed to sell some short stories, but not for much money, £5 a go or something like that. He had some rich American ladies who sent him money, which was very kind. And the only other thing he did was to teach the English language to some of the people in Trieste. So I just happened to look at the list of this half a dozen people who he taught English to. And you can guess what's come in. There were Chiots. He taught Rhodokeneki, Spartalis, I've forgotten the names now. His customers over there were basically the Chiots again, who were in Trieste. So it's the same names coming back to haunt me wherever I look this year. Folks, that's kind of the end of this presentation where I got to when I began it earlier this year. But when I first gave the talk, a couple of people from the Liverpool Greek Society came along. I didn't know they were coming, they came. They liked what I did. They've actually commissioned me to write a book about the whole subject of the Greeks in, or particularly in Liverpool, from 1840 until today. So I will at some point interview lots of Cypriots about their lives, see how they came here, and the other Greeks, because lots of people have come since the economic crisis the last few years. But I began to look into it all in the 19th century. I knew about these rich Greeks, Chiots. I started looking at census returns, a bit like that one I did in Manchester. To my amazement, I found hundreds of Greeks living in Liverpool in the late 19th century, from more working class kind of people. Lots of them working on the docks, probably moving the cotton around on behalf of the Chiots. Shopkeepers, very basic things like this. Some really strange things. If any of you from Cypriot families, you may have connections with the fish and chip business, right? The first Greek fish and chip shops in Liverpool I've come across were in 1901. I've come across 3 or 4 from that time, so I found that quite mind-blowing. The first Greek cafe I found is 1871, run by a man called Xantaki. So it's amazing. I found all these people. It's going to take quite a lot of effort to pull together the story, but it's not just the posh Greeks who are here and here in Manchester and also in Liverpool. I'm sure there was a working class Greek community in Manchester as well at the time, probably not as big because there wasn't so much dock work. The work here was more mill-based, which they probably didn't do. So I've basically I've got 68 pages of notes of all these names now. One name I looked at and thought, that doesn't look Greek. Some names I had to reject because there was a lot of English people born in places like Corfu because of the British colony. And I looked at this one name and I thought, that looks really, it doesn't look Greek, so I put a question mark next to it. For a bit of light relief, I decided to look up my own family history, just a bit of a change. With the name Williams, it's quite hard to find what happened. But I got back as far as my great-grandfather, who was another Williams, who was from Wales, and he was in Liverpool in the 1850s, 40s. And then I looked at, like that, did you see that record I showed you before written in ink? You see he was actually living in the house at the time. So I found he was living with his sister, whose name I can't remember, and she was with her husband. Her husband was called George Boyages, and he was a Greek sailor. So one of my ancestors' sister married a Greek sailor, so I think it wasn't just the bouzouki after all. Some of this meant I must be doing this project for a reason. He then had another child, also called George Boyages. I think if you say it differently, it's the name of a modern Greek actor. He'll get Voyages or something like that. He's been in lots of films. Whether we're connected, I don't know. And there, so that my grandfather therefore grew up in the house with these Greek people. Quite astonishing. Folks, that's as far as I've got. So the project does go on. I've got a lot more work to do in the future. That was where it began, and I'm delighted to see there were some Manchester angles in that as well as just Liverpool. So thank you very much. If anyone's got any questions, I'd be delighted to answer best I can.
Steve Williams. So I take the advantage to make the first question, sure, if I may. How were those people, those first Chiots in Greek? And parenthetically to say that this Voyages name is very well known in Chios, many Voyages people in Chios at the moment, so you have some remote relatives there. So to make a question and ask, how were those people regarded by the local society? How
Yes.
did they look at us?
Okay, I don't know about Manchester. In Liverpool, there were lots of other foreign merchants. Actually, I know there were foreign merchants in Manchester too. There were things like the Armenian community is at least as old as the Greeks, possibly even further back. So Liverpool was a cosmopolitan city. There were all kinds of communities there. So there was certainly generally no race thing. They quickly became part of the establishment. So I found things like in 1860, believe it or not, there's a fundraising for victims of some problem in Syria. Lots of the names collecting were Greek names. I was a big fan. So they got very involved. They didn't get involved in politics. They seemed to stay out of that. But they did try to get in committees for things like development of the docks. So generally my impression is they were fairly well regarded. and regarded as honest. However, there's an article from the New York Times from I think it's 1856, a long article which basically says the people in Liverpool were suspicious of the Chiots because they thought they were double dealing the money. They can't possibly, have had as much money as they claimed. So, like they say, you got that money there in Russia, but actually someone in Smyrna is probably claiming they got that money as well. So certainly the American correspondents quoting Liverpoolians claimed they were suspicious of the money. So I don't know, but what happened was that the Greeks in England, first they kept to themselves, and bit by bit they married into British society. They became part of the establishment, and that sort of happened in Liverpool as well, and then they left. The rich ones did. So most things make it look very respected, but just some suspicions on the fringe.
And also a number of them, the Anglican in faith, changed from the Orthodox to the Anglican faith.
I think that's probably right.
Intermarriage.
Yeah, intermarriage, exactly. So the certainly now I've looked at the more working class people. You look at the Greek sailors, they nearly all end up marrying Irish girls or Welsh girls. I've got a feeling when I'm going to go at some point to the church and look at the birth records, but the ones I've seen so far seem mainly from the elite, from the Chiots. I've got a feeling the ordinary Greeks married, Greek fellas in most cases, married local women, so they will have converted or lost interest. So Anglican or Catholic or Methodist or whatever. I'm sure you're right.
Because the Greeks were integrating
yes.
into the local society.
Exactly.
By marriage, and then the grandchildren, etc.
Yeah.
They converted. We still have a few which appear on the scene to christen their children or have a wedding.
Yeah.
And we don't know them at all.
Yeah.
But they are around.
Yeah.
And some of them became famous because they got high positions in the local authorities.
Yes.
Like the Zokonis family, for example.
Zokonis is a very famous Manchester Greek family. So.
Yeah, I'd just like to mention something, but it's something that maybe it will be some food for thought for your future endeavors about the Greek of Manchester. I've read that there was certainly a Greek community here just after the War of Independence and certainly before 1850s.
Yes.
There was an organized Greek community in Manchester.
Yeah.
1843.
Yeah, and they also had a Greek school at the time, but only survived for some reasons for a few years. So there was a Greek school operating in Manchester for the children of the Greek diaspora, but that was dissolved in a way before 1850. Now, after 1850, we do have evidence of many Greeks from various parts of
yes.
Greece or Cyprus coming to Manchester.
Yeah.
And we do have, for instance, this famous, still famous, Muratoglu, who came from Constantinople to build a cigarette factory that still creates under the name of Murati.
Yeah.
It was based in Murati,
yes.
who first, when the Ottomans at the time put some heavy taxes on tobacco production and cigarette production, they came to England
yes.
and they established a commercial company in London, but the factory was in Manchester.
I've come across that name because I think some of them lived in Liverpool as well, actually. So that helps me understand something. That's good. That's worth knowing, actually. Yeah, I've seen people who are involved in
so yeah, there was something that it seemed that there was a rather big Greek community between 1820s and 1850s, and then for some reason, probably because of Manchester also losing its importance as a manufacturing center, it went down.
Yeah, I think it's hard to keep things going over many generations, actually, because people come and go. Will do.
It's interesting when you said about the Genoans going to Chios and the names changing from Latin or Italian Greek, because in the trust fund, which was set up in the 1860s to build the church, some of the trustees have Italian type names.
Yes, well that's why. That's why, and of course there's it's more complicated because the names of the islands are often either Italian or Greek, so Syra or Syros, Chios or Scipio. Yeah, they sometimes call it Chio. Yeah, so you get the Italian names as well. Yeah, and it's one of these strange things trying to define what is a Greek anyway, because I found records of people born in Greece, living in Liverpool, in the late 19th century who clearly are Italian, because they have the thing, besides where you're born, there's something say, what's your nationality? And it'll say Italian. And the big Italian communities in the Greek heartland. So I'm not in charge of deciding who exactly is a Greek, I'm not into that sort of police thing, but you do have to take it into account. Lots of English people were born in parts of Greece at that time, and I'm thinking they're probably not relevant to my studies. They're probably from sailing families born in the Ionian Islands in the 1850s, 1860s. If they've got a name like mine, I reject it.
More questions?
Is the DNA part now? If you do the DNA, then you know you're not 100% Greek. You have so much Italian,
yes.
so much Caucasus.
Yeah, Jewish quite often. Yeah.
Well, historians would say that DNA is not part of history, but geology and
It
biology.
shows, it says you're not 100% Greek.
Yeah, whatever it means anyway.
So much Italian, so much Caucasus, and made you a little bit somewhere there.
Yes, yeah. Albanian? Yeah. Vlasto?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Thank you
Thanks very much.
Cheers. Thank you very much all for being here today. Thank you.